Welcome back, everyone. I am absolutely pumped to be your study buddy today. We're tackling one of the most transformational eras in American history. Today's explainer is all about the arsenal of democracy, America's massive role in World War II. We're going to break down the complex foreign policy shifts, the unbelievable domestic changes, and exactly what you need to know to just utterly crush your upcoming exam. So grab your notes, get focused, and let's lock in this knowledge.
Notice that second announcement up there? Only 2 classes left until the Regents. That means it is absolute crunch time, guys. We need to focus on the essential facts, the crucial vocabulary, and the big picture concepts that are literally guaranteed to show up on your test. This explainer right here is your ultimate cheat code for mastering this unit.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're hitting essential questions, neutrality to global war, the home front transformation, opportunities and injustices, a timeline practice quiz, and finally, a new global superpower.
Section 1. Essential questions. To really grasp this unit, we need to anchor our review around 2 massive historical mysteries. Here is our first essential question. Why did the United States abandon its traditional neutrality to become a superpower? Keep this huge shift in foreign policy in the back of your mind as we go. Like, how does a country that just wanted to be left alone ends up leading the free world?
And our second essential question, how did the Second World War transform American society? This shifts our focus to the incredible, messy, and complex changes happening right here on the domestic home front. Because war doesn't just happen on the battlefield, right? It completely rewires life for the everyday civilian.
Section 2. From neutrality to global war. To figure out how America became a global superpower, we actually have to look back to the 1930s. Check out term number 2 on your class vocab list there, isolationism. After the absolute devastation of World War I, the U.S. desperately wanted to reject global involvement and just mind its own business. Americans were basically determined not to repeat the mistakes that dragged them into that First World War. So the government actually legislated this desire to stay out of the conflict by passing the Neutrality Acts in the 1930s. These laws officially banned arms sales and loans to any countries at war. But, while the U.S. was trying to isolate itself, totalitarian regimes were rising globally. Hitler was violating the Treaty of Versailles, Japan was invading Manchuria, America's neutral stance was getting heavily tested.
Let's move along and see how this builds, because it's an exact escalation. By 1939, when war broke out in Europe, the U.S. was still officially neutral, but they started taking baby steps to help the Allies. First was the cash and carry policy. Then in 1941, things seriously escalated with the Lend-Lease Act, which allowed the U.S. to directly send military aid to countries like Britain and the Soviet Union who were actively fighting the Nazis.
And then before the U.S. even officially declared war, FDR and British Prime Minister Churchill issued the Atlantic Charter. This was a massive shift, guys. They established shared goals for the post-war world, famously calling for the final destruction of the Nazi tyranny. It was a crystal-clear signal that America's isolationist days were ending.
Meanwhile, tensions in Asia were rising, and then came the absolute breaking point. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a devastating surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,000 Americans. This tragedy completely forced America's hand. The very next day, they declared war on Japan, bringing the U.S. fully into World War II.
Section 3. The home front transformation. Once war was declared, the entire country had to pivot instantly. Everyday civilian life transformed completely overnight. The mobilization was just staggering, and total war production finally killed the Great Depression. But it definitely required serious civilian sacrifice. The Office of Price Administration stepped in to strictly ration essential goods like food, gas, and rubber. Everyday Americans were buying war bonds, planting victory gardens, and taking in heavy propaganda designed to keep the nation unified.
Section 4. Opportunities and severe injustices.
We absolutely have to acknowledge the paradox of the American wartime experience. It was a time of unprecedented new opportunities, but also deeply shameful civil rights violations. And this brilliantly illustrates that point. You have the incredible Double V campaign, an African-American effort fighting for a double victory against fascism abroad and racism at home. Contrast that directly with Executive Order 9066, a severe injustice authorizing the forced internment of Japanese Americans into prison camps.
We can see this contrast formalized right in your vocabulary list. Look at number 8, Executive Order 8082, which banned racial discrimination in wartime defense industries. A huge step forward. Yet right above it, at number 6, we see that the brutal Japanese internment policy was actually upheld by the Supreme Court in the Korematsu decision. Just a grave historical injustice.
The war also completely redefined the role of women in American society. Think of the iconic symbol of Rosie the Riveter. She represents the massive wave of women who stepped out of traditional roles and directly into the heavy industrial workforce to build airplanes and munitions. And beyond the factories, women were also serving in uniform in special military units like the Wakes and the Waves.
Section 5, Timeline and Events Practice Quiz.
All right, it is time to put all this information to the test. Let's make sure these critical historical milestones are locked into your memory. Here is your mental check. Look at these 4 massive events: D-Day, Pearl Harbor, the Neutrality Acts, and the Battle of Midway. Take a second. Can you place these in chronological order in your head?
Let's see how you did. First up, in 1935, we had the Neutrality Acts, trying to keep us out of the mess. Then, the timeline shifts violently in 1941 with the attack on Pearl Harbor. In 1942, U.S. forces win the Battle of Midway, which becomes the massive turning point in the Pacific. By 1944, Allied forces launch the D-Day invasion. And finally, in 1945, atomic bombings end the war, leading right into the founding of the UN and the Nuremberg trials.
Section 6, A New Global Superpower.
To wrap up today, we really need to look at the immediate aftermath. When the Axis powers finally surrendered, the global landscape was forever changed. The end of the war brought horrifying discoveries as the true extent of the Holocaust was revealed, with 6 million Jews murdered. The Nuremberg trials were held to hold Nazi leaders accountable. And to try and prevent this kind of devastation from ever happening again, the international community created the United Nations.
A huge part of this post-war push for peace was actually led by Eleanor Roosevelt. She played an absolutely crucial role at the UN in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This was essentially America taking its core ideals and translating them onto an international post-war platform to protect people's freedoms across the globe.
So what does this all mean? The United States completely abandoned its isolationist roots, mobilized its entire society, and emerged as an undisputed global superpower. But here is your final thought to chew on. The peace wouldn't last long. What new rivalry would soon step up to define the entire post-war world? Yep, the Cold War was just beginning. Keep that in mind as you prep for your exam, study hard, and you are going to absolutely ace this.